2, 1.
Action!
Okay, one more.
10 years ago, I thought about this idea about talking about intelligence, but I was not intelligent enough at the time. So it takes me 10 years to write just one draft. But I want to play with that. I met a couple of scientists and I was amazed by what they said. We're using basically 10% of our brain capacity. The rest, we don't have access to it. And I was fascinated by that. What happened if we have 100%? And what will be the logical step?
Sir?
Yes.
And what will be the next stage?
Well, the next stage would probably be control of other people.
What would happen if we could use more of our brains?
I'm gonna drive.
No, this is not possible. This is a police car.
Okay.
It was very interesting to play with that.
Did you always drive like that?
I've never driven before.
Great.
Imagine what would happen if you could use 20%,
I can feel every living thing.
30, 40, 50, 100. Imagine. And Luc Besson, bless his heart, imagines. You can unlock secrets that go beyond our universe.
So it starts with lots of conversation with big scientists. 12 of them were Nobel Peace Prize, and they are all of them in the ICM, the Institute for the research about the brain in Paris.
Action!
So I work a lot for years to try to find the right balance between what's real and what's fantasy and make the film enjoyable.
It is estimated most human beings only use 10% of their brain's capacity.
People tend to believe that they're only using 10% of their brain and they have this unbelievable magical capacity. The real answer is no one knows. There are some scientists who believe the 10% number is a total myth and the real number should be 100%. And there are other scientists who believe 10% is actually too generous, that our capacity is infinite. To answer that question, you really need to know something very fundamental. What is the brain's total capacity? And nobody knows that. But the simple fact that you can take a 60-year-old person and with some basic training, improve that person's cognition 15, 20, 30%, suggests that we're not using anywhere close to the maximum possible capability.
The idea of increased brain power may be the answer to that. Big maybe.
If you were to compare it to a car, it would probably be like driving a car at 60 miles an hour. We're not accessing the 120 miles per hour that the car, in theory, is capable of.
The brain is an organ which receives perceptions, the touch, vision, which transforms this perception into action. That's all the brain is doing. It can be very complex.
There is something in the brain called critical periods, when the brain is most receptive to learning and has the maximum potential to acquire new skills and new tasks. When we're a baby in the first 3-4 years of our life, we are born with a lot more nerve cells than we need. That's because we are born with virtually unlimited capacity. And then there is a second critical period in the teenage years where the brain again opens up and gives you a second chance to learn a lot of amazing new skills. But then once the brain has mastered that task, it almost becomes so efficient, it becomes automatic processing. And that's how the brain has this almost infinite capacity to keep on increasing itself, because if it constantly needed to rely on different parts of the brain working over time, then there would be a physical limit. Now, what we really need to see is, can the brain do 20 things at the same time while going at 120 miles per hour for all of those same functions? That would be the holy grail. Can you sort of play chess while you're studying for your medical school exams, while you're playing a video game, while you're talking to your mother on the phone? Can you do all of those things at full capacity? And I think that is the next step for neuroscience to figure out.
Since when did you start writing Chinese?
Since an hour ago.
It's, as is, total fantasy. So you can't disagree with someone's fantasy. And let's just suppose for a few minutes that we possibly could use some drug to actually enhance the mind's ability.
We already have drugs that can enhance our cognitive capabilities. For example, drugs used to treat attention deficit disorder like Ritalin, Adderall, all of them are known to improve attention. We have a second category of drugs that can improve memory by 10 or 15%, and those are used currently to treat people with Alzheimer's disease. Are there drugs that can be combined with either a specific brain training exercise or with a device that would then make 2 + 2 = 5? That's a great question because we're headed in that direction. There's a group of researchers in England that have discovered that something as little as between 18 to 100 genes may have been responsible for the dramatic shift that occurred in the way human brains evolved over the last 3 to 7 million years. So if we could identify those 18 to 100 genes in terms of their function more fully and somehow do genetic procedures where we can enhance the function of those genes, you might well be able to create a superhuman in terms of cognitive powers.
A few years ago, we thought that if we knew the entire composition of the DNA, we would know everything about us. In fact, this is not true. The DNA is producing something which is called RNA, but not only one per site in the DNA, but thousands, so that at the end, the number of compounds which are produced by the DNA is huge. It's unbelievable. So that just knowing in brief the composition of the DNA doesn't help so much, except to identify mutations responsible for some diseases, for instance.
The fact that we have, hundreds of billions of cells who communicate 1,000 signals per second per cell, the web is nothing compared to that. So I was fascinated by that. What's very interesting, and one of the doctors confirm it, can't prove it, but he say it's not illogical, is that at a certain moment, when you open up your capacity on your brain, if you get 20%, then you can open 30. But when you reach 30, you can open 40. And in fact, it's like dominoes.
Once the brain reaches 20%, it opens up and expands the rest. There are no more obstacles. They fall away like dominoes. I'm colonizing my own brain.
I would say the possibility is endless. And the reason I say that is 100 years ago, we could not have predicted what we have today. So anything I predict today is almost certainly going to be wrong 30, 40, 50 years from now. For example, telepathy. People would say telepathy is impossible, right? Even though we can read people's emotions, right? That's a form of telepathy.
Listen up here, Delio. Get off your desk, sit in your chair, pick up the red pen to the left of you, and take down everything I say.
The reason I like the 10% analogy is because to me 10% is probably the number that best illustrates how much we know about the brain. Everything we know about the brain could be wrong. And so there's this old saying, if the brain were so simple that we could understand it, then we would be so simple that we could not understand it.
If we get greater brain capacity, we will learn how to control ourselves. Right now, there is no real self-control, speaking just in large human terms.
It's the dark side. What can you do with the intelligence? You can do good.
Take this medication, work out, eat organic. You'll be okay.
Or you can do bad.
Ultimately, who you are is created by your brain.
It's an interesting thought that these ideas are floating around about technology and our use of it and where it's going. Where we are now, it's a question need to be thought seriously about.
Almost everything we have today would have seemed like magic 100, 150 years ago. The internet, mobile telephones. As we've become more intelligent, there's also an element of serendipity in some of these discoveries. Our ways of thinking about the brain are simply constrained by our own human ability. Some of the big jumps have come by people sort of venturing off into strange areas. So at some point, the breakthrough will have to come from somebody who thinks out of the box.
Where is she?